Way back in the spring of 1990, 10-year-old me was given a $5 allowance. In search of something to spend my money on, I came upon something fantastic at my local convenience store newsstand. It was then that I started a lifelong obsession with the gold standard of sequential art, the comic book. Now, as an old man, I have decided to open up some old boxes and dig into my comic book collection. I decided it's time for me to review and analyze the illustrations and artists that made me comics crazy. Hey folks, this is Chris Crazy House once again for another episode of Chris Crazy House Presents Comics Crazy, and we are back with Wolverine Blood and Claws Part 2, and this is Wolverine issue number 36, and we are in the thick of the story right now, and we see right now it says, "It tolls for thee." That's why I played that Metallica at the beginning of this episode. I had to do it because, you know, the story takes place in late 1930s Spain. We are riding with Ernest Hemingway. He wrote a book called For Whom the Bell Tolls, and Metallica made a very famous song with the same title years later. And, you know, that song comes from my favorite Metallica album, Ride the Lightning. So I had to play it, and I've always enjoyed Metallica's early work, pre-Black Album, and Ride the Lightning is my favorite of those albums. So we are here with the next part of this Wolverine comic, and let's take a look at this cover. So like I said before, I was not a fan of issue number 35's cover. It was okay. It was passable, but not as good as this one. This one is a lot more fun. I remember seeing this on the shelf and, you know, just look at them side by side. Which book would you want to grab up more? Okay. You know, Lady Deathstrike looks cool on this one, but this cover is badass. We got Wolverine in his classic brown and gold costume, smoking a cigar, clothes kind of ripped up in the flames, shooting a World War style machine gun. What's not to like about this cover? This is completely badass. Like, if I were to see an action movie with this cover, I would want to see this movie. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is something that, you know, you would pick up off the movie shelf, the bookshelf, whatever, with this cover. All right. How could you not like something like this? Even if you knew nothing about Wolverine or you knew nothing about what the story was inside, you would pick up this book just from this cover. And this is what I'm talking about when I talk about classic comic book covers. They make all the difference for the sales that were made back then. You know, we also were dealing with a lot of popular artists at that time. So this book, once again, is illustrated by Mark Silvestri, and Dan Green does the inking on the inside. It looks like someone else did the inking for this cover, and I can tell a little bit of subtle difference between the other covers and this one. But I'll have to look and see who did the inking on this cover. But Mark is the one that did the illustration, but the inking is done by somebody else. And Larry Hama, once again, is doing the writing. So let's peel it open here and get to part 2 of Blood and Claws. And it starts off right here with the action of Ernest Hemingway driving the car, breaking through a blockade. And we got this fine Spanish lady, Inez, shooting at the fascist guards. So this drops you right back into the action, okay? And Puck and Wolverine are kind of just sitting in the back seat. You know, Puck is asking for a gun to be thrown to him, and Wolverine seems like he's having the time of his life sitting in the back seat there. And we see the war going on in the background of the bombers, you know, dropping bombs on the city of Guernica, and the smoke and everything rising up as the city itself is in flames. Very well done splash page. Once again, going from the cover to this, it drops you right back into the middle of the action. So we got this Nazi blockade with machine guns and everything else shooting up the car that they're all driving in, and it causes the car itself to crash. And they have to figure out a way to get past this machine gun blockade, and Wolverine volunteers to be the one that's going to help them get out of this mess. And he says he has the healing factor, so he'll do it. And Puck asks him, like, how do you know you still have your healing factor? And Wolverine's like, I can feel it in my bones. So even though Puck has reverted back to his 1930s self, Wolverine has, you know, stayed the same through all of this. He still has his healing factor, still has his adamantium. Now, once again, I told you before, they do a lot of teasing. The real action doesn't really start till the end of this issue, where Wolverine actually uses his claws. So they tease a lot. But once again, he finds very creative ways to fight these soldiers in this time. And instead of trying to get a gun, Wolverine grabs some actual tools. And you know that we know that the tool is a slang term for your gun in these days, but Wolverine grabs some literal tools, a hammer and a wrench, and he's going to use that to go to work on these Nazi soldiers. Now, I love this panel. This is actually one of my favorite panels from this era. I spent a lot of time trying to emulate it and draw it. I drew it a couple of times, and I even, you know, use a character of my own in this position, and I put some weapons in his hands instead of, you know, the hammer and the wrench. So I love this panel. I just love the way it's designed. It taught me a lot about positioning of characters, foreshortening, and, you know, getting a great look on your character's face as he's, you know, running towards you. And who wouldn't be scared of seeing Wolverine? Like I said, you don't even know if he has mutant powers or whatever, but seeing this crazy person running at you with a hammer and a wrench, that's enough to give anyone some scares. So we see Wolverine diving into the action. He actually manages to not get hit by the first barrage of bullets, but as he gets closer, they do wind up chewing him up a bit right before he can get to the blockade. And these guys are saying, like, you know, thinking they did a good job because they downed this crazy person running at them with these tools. But just like any good action movie, we think the hero is down until he opens his eyes and we see that he's not dead. And the commander of this unit is scared as hell that this person is still alive somehow. And we see Wolverine jumping on them with the tools in his hand. And once again, another great panel that I enjoyed looking at and emulating back then. Just seeing him go wild with these tools going upside these dudes' heads with a hammer and a wrench. And Wolverine winds up finishing them off by himself and winds up taking their machine gun. So now they're ready to go out there and help the rebels with some extra weapons of their own. So as we cut to the other side of Guernica, this is where we are seeing the hanging of Lady Deathstrike. And we come upon the commander of the Nazi group that's going to hang her and execute her. And his name is Hauptmann Schlachter. And he has commanded his troops hang her up with some wire and throw her up on the nearest telephone pole and hang her right then and there for killing his troops with her bare hands. He says he wishes they had more time to interrogate her and figure out how she was able to slaughter these troops that way. but they don't have time, so they're just going to hang her right then and there because they don't want to waste bullets using a firing squad. And once again, great use of silhouettes in this case, you know, without having to show too much detail with all these panels. But we see that, you know, she's strapped up here, getting ready to be hung in the first panel, and then the half track pulls away. So now her feet don't have anything to stand on. And we see right here the panel of her actually hanging right there, and the ravens circling around, getting ready to have their meal of this dead body. And soon, these Nazi troops realize that Lady Deathstrike is not dead. And she starts talking to them, saying, like, you didn't give me time to give you my proposition. Okay, you wound up executing me too quickly. So I believe Lady Deathstrike could have easily just completely annihilated and mutilated these troops right then and there. But she wants to get their help in tracking down Wolverine. So she let them hang her. And now she's going to do a demonstration of what type of power she has. And I always loved this panel right here, or this action panel going from here to here to here, showing that she's easily able to break the wire around her neck by enlarging her neck with her cybernetics. It's actually very creepy in a way, and I like the way her eyes kind of like bug out of her head in that way as well. Because I think the facial expressions done by both Marc Silvestri are very simplistic, but it gets across the point. And I love how you're going to notice it in this book, they do a great job as far as drawing the different ethnicities of the people here. So you get to see people from that area in Spain. You're seeing Lady Deathstrike, who is from Japan. So they make sure that the faces look like people from actual Japan. We get to see, you know, Gateway, who is an Aboriginal from Australia. We get to see some of more of the Spanish troops and the Nazi troops. So you get to see Germans and Spanish on both sides. So you get a great mix of different types of people. And I think Marc Silvestri does a great job in illustrating these faces to the point where, you know, you can get the point across of the ethnicity and also the facial expressions as well. So Lady Deathstrike frees herself. She lands down in front of them, and one of the birds, the ravens, actually lands on her arm, and she kills it in front of them when she announces her name as Deathstrike. So as this is happening, we go back to the present, and a storm is starting to whip up in front of Pierce and his Reavers. And the reason that this is happening is because Lady Deathstrike is actually in the past causing problems with the time continuum. The fact that she just killed that raven so callously, you know, basically just trying to show off and showcase how deadly she is, that's actually caused a ripple in the time stream. And we see the feathers of that raven kind of coming out of the storm and flying around in front of them in the present. Going back to the past, and we're back in Spain with some of the rebels, and both Ernest Hemingway, Puck, Inez, and Wolverine join with the rest of the rebels in this camp. And apparently there's only 2 of them left, plus a little young prisoner from the other side. And they're burying all of their comrades that were killed in a fight that they had earlier that morning with the fascist forces. Once again, we get a good look at, like I said, Lady Deathstrike with the Nazis. I wanted to, just like I said, showcase how simple the artwork is as far as drawing these different characters, but you can see the ethnicity in their face. It's very distinct that Lady Deathstrike is from Japan, and you can see a classic picture of her father as well. And basically what she's done is she's promised these Nazis that if they help her capture Wolverine, she'll give them the secret to the bonding of adamantium to the human skeleton, and also like other things that her father came up with during World War II. All right, so she's going to give it to them earlier than they actually should have it, basically. So they agree to help her because this Schlachter feels that if he helps Lady Deathstrike, he'll go from being just the commander of a military unit and he'll be moved up in the ranks of the Nazi Party. So we're back with Wolverine and his group, and they're about to be bombed by an enemy raider, and he actually drops one of the bombs right there onto the horses so these people can't escape. And Puck tried to run over there and save the horses, but winds up getting caught in the blast. Very effective way of showing this type of destruction. They use all silhouettes of the bomb being dropped here and Puck being hit by the bomb, but it's not so super violent that we can't, have a comic book with this image in here without getting attacked by the censors or the comics code. So Wolverine sees the jet flying by, and he decides to pick up his machine gun and do some shooting. So this is kind of a modified version of what we saw on the cover. Let's take a look at it once again. Wolverine firing the machine gun. That shows on the cover he's in his full costume, but in the book he's still just in the regular clothes. We're going to see him in the costume though, don't worry about that. So he shoots up the jet. It has holes in it, his fuel tank is leaking, and he decides to take off. And they're worried now that Puck has been hurt by the explosion and they got to get him to a doctor. But they're thinking that they have to walk because they don't have a car or any type of transport, and they're looking at one of the hills or one of the mountain passes called Orica that they have to get Puck to the actual hospital. But the problem is one of the prisoners that they have heard which way they were going. So they feel they have to execute this young prisoner before they go. And there was a bit of a debate with the group there. This is almost actually like the scene from Saving Private Ryan. If you remember that very infamous scene from Saving Private Ryan where they had the German prisoner and they had to decide whether they were going to let him go or not. And the same thing happens here, but instead of an older prisoner, it's a young boy. And they decide that they let him run away because he swore on his mother and his grandmama and his sisters and everyone else that he wouldn't tell which way they were going. But they let him go, and then they say they were going to basically shoot him in the back. And we see the gunshot go off, and Wolverine actually is not worried about it. He's kind of like, whatever, that, it's war. War is tough, and maybe this kid might tell on us, so we gotta let him get shot. So Wolverine doesn't stop the execution. And I love the way that this panel is done. A very extreme close-up of Logan, and you'll see his eye there. But once again, this looks a lot like what the shading and the shadow work done by Mike Mignola at this time. And also, I'm trying to think of other artists who kind of use these types of techniques. Like the only other one I can think of from like the old school, maybe like Walt Simonson, the way like the extensive use of shadows to add drama to your panels. But something that is very well done, and I enjoy it a lot. I use it a lot on my own comic books. So as we get back to the Nazi group and Lady Deathstrike, we see the jet that Wolverine shot up. It finally explodes, and you can see that this commander doesn't even really care about the pilot that just died because he uses the pilot's helmet to light his cigarette. And they finally catch the little boy that was let go by that group. So they made it seem like they were going to shoot him. They shot at him, but they missed on purpose and just let him go. And he promised, and he actually does keep his word. He doesn't want to tell this group of Nazis which way that group of heroes went, but they didn't count on him actually having to meet up with Lady Deathstrike. And she shows up and she's going to do the interrogation. So she makes him tell which way they went by, you know, using her claws on this little boy's face. And I always thought that this was a very unnerving and unsettling panel of Lady Deathstrike using her claws to kind of just so lightly dig into this little boy's face. As someone who is about the same age or maybe a little bit younger than this boy right here, I can imagine this would be a scary situation. And it's made even more dramatic by having the lighting come from under him. You know, if you ever want a good surprise or a good horror scene, you kind of want to put the light underneath your characters. And this is how it's done here. It's not realistic because I don't believe the light would be coming from the bottom here, but it adds drama to the panel. So we get back to the mountain pass of Oroika, and we have our heroes trying to get Puck to the hospital. And, you know, Wolverine's talking with one of the guys and realizes that he intentionally missed to let that little boy go. But Wolverine realizes that they're actually being followed because he's picked up the scent of the Nazis following them. And he realizes that, yeah, that little boy might have swore on God and everything else, but he's like, I know somebody who can make him talk. And he's referring to Lady Deathstrike. So he already figured out what happened. When that little boy got back to the Nazis, he didn't tell the Nazis which way these people went. But if Lady Deathstrike got a hold of him, he told her definitely which way they were going. And at first, they actually get shot at, and Wolverine makes sure to protect the rebel from getting shot in the head by a sniper. And Wolverine basically lets them know, I'll hold them back. You guys go ahead, get Puck to the hospital, and I'll protect the way. I'll make sure they don't go through this pass. And as they go forward, this is where we get Wolverine getting down and dirty and, you know, stop being just Logan and getting into Wolverine mode. So he figures out that the machine gun is broken, so that's why it's not firing anymore. And you see him pull his shirt off and showcase the classic brown and gold, pulls his mask out of his back pocket and pulls it over his face. Another amazing panel by Mark Silvestri. I remember these panels very much so when I was younger, just being in awe of how cool it was, because Wolverine was always a cool character, and he's drawn in a very cool way here. I always loved the image of Wolverine putting on his mask. I don't know why, but the way he puts it on, it always looks extremely cool when he puts on his mask, and you know he's getting ready to go to work when he puts his mask on. So the Nazis wind up throwing a grenade at the machine gun and destroying it, and they figure that whoever was holding the pass, they must have gotten him. They must have put him out of commission, or he must be down or whatever, so they can go chase after the people they were chasing after. So they go through the mist and the smoke, and they don't realize that they're heading into disaster, okay? Because they come face to face with Wolverine. And I love how he's introduced here with kind of like in a semi-silhouette. You can kind of see him in the mist a little bit, see his claws, and you know something extremely dangerous is coming at the villains of this story. And we jump right into the panel of Wolverine wrecking shop on these Nazis. And of course, you know, he doesn't waste any time talking to them or saying anything. He just goes right into ripping into them. And once again, creative way of showcasing violence without going over the top or being too gory. But we get past the comics code. We got one character kind of in front of the impalement, kind of his hand in the silhouette, and we see the claws kind of coming out of his back. So a creative way of showcasing this level of violence without being too gory, you know, for the censors or the comics code. And we see Lady Deathstrike. She hops off the truck and says she's ready to go in there and fight Wolverine. And she winds up walking into the mist to go face him. And this is where we get our final cliffhanger before the big battle between Wolverine and Lady Deathstrike. So that is the end of this issue of Wolverine, issue number 36, Blood and Claws Part 2. And I love this issue. I love how it was drawn. I love the way it's done. We get a great sense of, you know, the illustration of all the different characters, where we get to see how well Mark Silvestri draws their ethnicity. We get a great sense of the emotion on all the characters' faces, even though it was drawn very simply, you know, just almost kind of working with the silhouettes and the basic shading on faces. And we get it all in this issue. We get great action and even some great violence. You know, it's shown in a very tactful way. It's showcased, you know, the fact that, you know, World War II and pre-World War II, a lot of things that were going on in Europe at that time, the Spanish Civil War, everything was extremely violent during that time. And there was a lot of bloodshed. Lots of people perished during this time. And to be able to showcase that level of violence in a comic book, you're going to have to stretch here and there and find some creative ways to get around the comics code to make sure that you still maintain the brutality of that era. So I think they did a great job with this book here, and it gets even dirtier and more raw in the next issue when we actually get to the point where Wolverine and Deathstrike are fighting each other. So we will get to that in the next episode. If you enjoyed this one, if you enjoyed me doing this review of these Wolverine comics, go ahead and like this video. Make sure you go ahead if you want to discuss anything or let me know what you enjoyed about this comic. Let me know in the comment section. Make sure you subscribe so that you're here for the very next episode of Blood and Claws and Chris's Crazy House's Comics Crazy. And we're going to be doing some more as time goes on. So make sure you go ahead and share this with other comic book fans that you know or that you're friends with, or maybe even a family member who is a comic book fan. Anyway, folks, I appreciate you all being here. And let me ask you a question. What's your favorite, you know, one of my subs asked me this on the community page. What's your favorite Wolverine costume? Let me know. Are you a fan of the gold, blue, and black, his original costume, or are you more a fan of this one, the brown and the gold? I like this one. This is the one I kind of grew up with. I've gotten used to it over the years during this time. So this was kind of like my favorite Wolverine costume. I just like, it looks better on him, in my opinion. I think it fits his character a lot better when he's wearing this. But, you know, some people like the classic gold and blue. You guys let me know in the comments section what you think. Anyway, guys, this is Chris Crazy House signing out. Peace.